Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central. It's been a while since I've had a guest on the channel, but now that we're past the NBA trade deadline, I thought what better time than to bring in one of our Bulls beat writers. You know him for all his great work covering this team over at The Athletic. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show Darnell Mayberry of The Athletic. Darnell, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate you making the time.
Appreciate you having me.
Now, if you're not already, be sure to follow Darnell at Darnell Mayberry on Twitter. Check out all of his great work over the Athletic and covering the Chicago Bulls. But also, I'd be remiss not to mention his other business adventure, Money Talks. As someone myself who works in finance on my own journey of reaching financial independence, it's one of the reasons I do this channel on the side. But Darnell has a host of great tips, advice, guidance on how to be smarter with your money and save and invest for your future. So check all of that out as well. I'll leave links to that in the description. All right, so Darnell, I haven't had you on in a while. I believe the last time I had you on, it was last season. It was towards the beginning of the season when everything was kind of falling apart. The Bulls had started off with that 5-14 record. It was clear the group had hit its ceiling. Zach and the Bulls had agreed to find a new home, and a lot of us thought, okay, he's going to be traded soon, most likely in the coming months. Fast forward 15 months, and Zach LaVine now finally gets traded, going to the Sacramento Kings, which of course ends up being the only move the Bulls make prior to the deadline. I, of course, want to get your thoughts about the trade deadline at large and the Bulls' lack of moves and what it was, what we thought was going to be a sell off for the Bulls. But let's start with Zach LaVine trade. What were your initial thoughts on the deal, and were you surprised by how things went down?
Initially, I didn't hate it. I think it was very polarizing deal that the Bulls made, and I do give them credit for finally moving the contract. They call it a sunk cost if we're sticking with the financial analogies here. They weren't going to get a great haul for Zach LaVine, and
Yeah.
so to be able to get off of the contract and to go into a different direction, I applaud them for finally making that decision and getting some value for Zach LaVine. I don't love the value that they got for him. I don't love the fact that they had to trade him to regain control of the pick that, in all likelihood, they were going to keep anyway this season. So there's a lot of things that you can criticize about how they did that deal. What they got back when they did that deal is my biggest criticism. I think that should have been done a long time ago, and they could have sold a lot higher than they did. But for them to finally pick a direction, and that's what people like me have been calling for at least 2 seasons now. That to me is a success in and of itself, and so I give them credit for doing that.
No, I wanted to talk about AK's press conference shortly after the deadline passed. A lot of Bulls fans were disappointed, frustrated, quite frankly, concerned coming out of that presser and whether or not this guy is the man for the job in running this franchise and bringing it back to relevance. Like there were a lot of eyebrow raising comments that came out of that press conference, in my opinion. At the last trade deadline, that press conference when the Bulls didn't make a single trade, I believe it was for the third straight deadline. I think it was actually you that point blank asked, "Hey, AK, what are you selling to the fans on the direction of this team and why they should be coming out to the games?" Of course, I think you got a non-answer to the question, probably something along the lines of, pitching the Bulls trying to make the playoffs one more time, which they didn't do. But anyway, 12 months later, walking away from that press conference, I guess the question still remains, in your view, what are the Bulls selling here?
Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc. Um, no, Derrick Rose now. It's pretty bad how little the Bulls have to sell of this current um, just era. And this is my 8th season now covering the team. I got here shortly after Zach LaVine arrived in the Jimmy Butler trade,
Right.
and they've missed the playoffs. I'm presuming that they're going to miss the playoffs again this season. This will be 7 out of the last 8 seasons that they will not
Yeah.
have even made the playoffs. And um, you know, for AK to say at that press conference that the direction could be a high lottery pick, the play-in, or the playoffs. I mean, he's the leader of the franchise. He should have a well-established vision and direction for where he wants to take this organization. And that comment alone just said he doesn't. And if I'm a Bulls fan, I'm really discouraged to go 5 years into this tenure now and to be starting over. and the lone player that's going to be remaining is Lonzo Ball, a guy who missed almost 3 seasons because of a career-threatening knee injury. And so
Right.
there's just so many things that have gone wrong with this rebuild. And first the retool, and now it's obviously going to be a rebuild. And if you're a Bulls fan, what gives you any confidence in this current regime that they can lead successfully a rebuild?
Let me ask you this because and if you don't feel comfortable answering, that's also fine. But I know you covered the Oklahoma City Thunder for a number of years,
Yeah.
which a lot of people regard as having one of the best front offices in the league. Um, sometimes I watch AK when he gives these press conferences, and I'm always trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Saying, all right, I'm not going to be an armchair GM.
Yeah.
He's in this business. He's been in the business for a while, and you don't get to that level in a position of basketball unless you know what you're doing. But man, you know after that press conference and just based on what we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years, I'm really starting to question the man's competence and whether he's fit for this role. So I guess my question is, you've been covering the game for a long time, both with the Bulls, the Thunder, other teams as well. You do this for a living, so you have better insight into it than I do. Do you think AK is the right man for the job? Do you think he knows what he's doing?
Yes and no. Um, I do think, I don't think we know we saw it. We saw this team that first season that they put this roster together. They were clicking before Lonzo Ball got hurt, and so we can't take away that. We can't just ignore the fact that he's the same guy that put that team together.
Sure.
And if Lonzo Ball doesn't get hurt, um, who knows what happens with that core. Now, there's all kinds of stuff that this management team did not do in these last 3 years that easily could have been done to make the roster better, to build the organization's assets, and to put this team in a better position moving forward so that you're not sitting here wondering where they go from here now, 5 years later. So to me, he has to have some sort of grace for the roster that he put together that was working. But then at the same time, so much has happened since that I think the benefit of the doubt is non-existent to so many because so much time has passed without him having any sort of real action that has made this franchise better.
Yeah, and I do like to remind a lot of my viewers of that as well, because everyone's kind of going in on AK right now, and rightfully so, but also the reminder that while it has been 4 or 5 years, it's still a relatively short time from like a franchise building standpoint. And you do have to remember that everyone was loving everything, all the moves that were being made in that summer of 2021. And then of course when it doesn't work out, it's like, well, clearly he didn't know what he was doing. And it's like, well, it was working. And it's just unfortunate that Alonzo Ball got injured, which I know, people like to talk about that a lot as far as what kind of um tore apart the whole plan that they were trying to implement, right? I think the biggest mistake, like you're talking about, is they didn't have a plan B. There wasn't a contingency plan should things not go properly, and they didn't act upon it quick enough. Let's talk about what's next, though. What this team does going forward. I think Casey Johnson mentioned it shortly after the deadline closed that yeah, the Bulls are done making moves, but a lot of groundwork was laid for changes to come this summer. I'm curious to know, just from your sources, based on what you know, what were you hearing as far as what some of that groundwork looks like? How active was AK at the deadline, even though only one deal got made? What were some of the potential deals discussed that will maybe be revisited come the offseason?
Yeah, I kept hearing that even though they love Vooch, that he was very much in trade talks. And again, it was a matter of, to a degree, what the Bulls were willing to accept back. Our John Hollinger at The Athletic also reported that Lonzo Ball, they had a first round pick on the table for Lonzo Ball, which is incredible.
Wow.
Incredible. If true, again, that's John Hollinger's reporting, but
Right.
um, that is to me those types of deals the Bulls should have been looking at and should have jumped at the opportunity to take in at this deadline. And so that would have laid the foundation even more, as you know, to be able to come out of this. Um, with a head of steam, with able to be able to draft players or use that draft capital then to go out and acquire some established players. And that's the type of forward thinking that you see other front offices, like you mentioned earlier, constantly make. If the Pelicans need to avoid the tax, hey, we'll take on Daniel Tice and cut him and just take on a second round pick. Maybe we'll use that second round pick later, maybe we won't, but we've got another asset because
Sure.
we took advantage of an opportunity in the market. And that's the types of moves that we're not seeing the Bulls make. But getting off of Zach LaVine's contract was a huge step. Regaining control of their first round pick was a huge step. There was more obviously on the table, as I mentioned, but Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, Josh Giddey's restricted free agency. That's going to be a huge decision for the Bulls coming up this summer. And so those are the foundational things that now they have to turn their attention to. What are they going to do with Nikola Vucevic now that they didn't trade him? Uh,
Right.
those are all decisions that they're going to have to make this summer.
Are you, speaking of Vucevic, are you able to share any potential offers that were on the table for Vuce that you know of anyway? I mean, there were reports coming out that the Warriors obviously were very interested. There was talk of, Gary Payton, Kevon Looney, couple second round picks. Obviously, Payton and Looney are expiring deals. So in my view, that's very good value for Vucevic. And I think the biggest, concern I have right now is Vuce looks very checked out after the trade deadline, after not getting traded. I mean, he just has not looked like the same player that we saw at the beginning of the season. So all you can think about now is his trade value just sort of tanking from here. But just curious to know, what, because obviously they were shopping him. What were some of the offers that were had?
No, that was pretty much it right there. The one you mentioned, the Warriors were really interested in him, and then the not LeBron, the Kevin Durant sweepstakes
Mhm.
and Jimmy Butler sweepstakes and all of those things just kind of derailed the momentum for Vooch. But um, I don't think that the Bulls will be unable to trade him this summer. I think that they'll be able to revisit that, and there will be a market for him on an expiring contract. So, with the league seeing him still be able to contribute at a high level this season, whether he's a starting center, an emergency fill-in who's primarily a bench player at this point, he still clearly has a room on a championship caliber team if a team is able to accommodate him. So I do think the Bulls will be able to revisit that this summer. All was not lost. My thing is you could have gotten some draft capital now, perhaps,
Right.
and that's the biggest loss I think by not trading him now.
I did want to talk about the Bulls backcourt a bit. You were mentioning Kobe White, Josh Giddey, restricted free agency. I think there's going to come to a point where the Bulls are going to have to decide how they want to structure their backcourt because right now they just have so many guards. Josh Giddey obviously up for restricted free agency. You mentioned Kobe White potentially being discussed in some trades. How do you think the Bulls are going to prioritize their future, whether it be between Giddey, Kobe White, and Io specifically?
I think they're going to go with Giddy because they made the trade for Alex Caruso,
Right,
and they have control of his contract, and as a restricted free agent, they can extend him now. Um, I don't know if that's the wisest choice based on what we've seen the first half of this season. They love his versatility, his size, his playmaking, and those are all valuable things. But at what price? And the flaws are not value are not his strengths are not valuable enough to where his flaws are going to be covered.
right,
And and that's a huge issue for Josh Giddey when you're talking about re-signing him to a lucrative extension. So I'm really curious to see how they handle it because they haven't in the past been able to cut their losses and admit their mistakes and get off of them. And so they double down, whether it's Vooch's extension, whether it's
right.
Patrick Williams' extension, Zach LaVine. I still maintain that he earned that maximum contract, but it ended up not being able to be an impactful deal for the Bulls. And so, you're seeing these time and time again, and now they trade for Josh Giddey. Are they going to re-sign him to a deal that he's unable to perform to the level of? And then Kobe White following that. I just think that these guys have probably given you as much value as they're going to give you on team friendly deals. And the forward thinking GM would make deals to get ahead of that and maybe ship them somewhere else and get some assets while you can.
Was Josh Giddey discussed at all at the trade deadline as far as being a potential option to trade?
Not that I've heard.
Okay.
And like I said, they love what he brings. But the shooting, the defense, I mean, those things are hard to mask, especially at the position he plays. And so at any position in this league now. And
Right.
so how they overcome that, I don't know.
Do you think Billy Donovan wants to stick around? And the reason I ask is because you covered him correctly when you were with the Thunder, right? He was with the team for when you were there for a little
Briefly,
bit.
briefly, I overlapped with him for like a month and then I
Oh,
moved.
got it, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just
So
curious because I mean it was believed, and I don't know, maybe it's inaccurate on my part to think that, but it was believed that, part of the reason that he wanted to leave the Thunder was because they were going down a path of rebuilding and he didn't want to be a part of a rebuild. I mean, that's clearly what the Bulls are doing right now. I mean, do you think that he wants to be around here long term, or is there even the possibility of the front office saying, "Hey, maybe Billy isn't the right guy for this role, and maybe we should be looking at something else"?
he came out about a week or a week and a half ago and refuted those reports. And it wasn't
Oh,
his
okay.
first time saying that. He said that uh, he never said that he wanted to leave Oklahoma City because they were rebuilding. And in fact, he's now saying that most of his career has been pretty much rebuilding situations.
Right.
When guys leave in college and he's has having to replace them, uh,
Sure.
and then obviously now losing DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso, and Zach LaVine, and so Billy feels like he's the man for the job. I don't know how much of that is just saying, I'd like to keep a job versus really wanting to take on whatever it is the Bulls are about to embark upon. Because this is, as we saw the other night in that 40-point loss to the Pistons, this could be ugly for a while, especially if you don't hit on this draft pick that you have coming in this season and getting a potential franchise changer. So, um, you know, when you're watching a team, as you say, with players, and you're observing as closely as I am, players who may look checked out, um, you look at the coach and you say, is someone going to be held accountable here?
Sure.
Uh, and so I don't know if it's a matter of if Billy wants to come back or if the team wants him back, but at some point you've got to say this is unacceptable and who's going to be held accountable.
Yeah. And I know we were talking briefly about this right before we started recording, but I think the biggest thing that has bothered me this season, I shouldn't even just say this season, but the past few seasons is I miss the days when the Bulls were very much energized, giving maximum effort when they were on the court, took the game very seriously. They were very hard on themselves when they lost. And again, I know it's, oh, it's just a game. Yes, it is just a game, but it's, you're representing the city of Chicago. You have a huge fan base that loves this team. When you go out there, you give it your all, right? And I just feel like, especially watching, last night's game, they clearly were not prepared. And quite frankly, they didn't really seem like they cared either, that they were just getting absolutely embarrassed. And so I miss the days that, we had guys like Joakim Noah, Taj Gibson, Kirk Heinrich, things like that, guys that just always gave it all when they were on the floor. Do you get that sense as well, covering this team and just sort of, their overall demeanor and how they're approaching the season?
No, I don't. They don't have those guys in the locker room. And it's a
Right.
bunch of soft-spoken, nice guys. Like, the days of Alex Caruso and DeMar DeRozan, even guys like Patrick Beverly and Goran Dragic and Andre Drummond to a degree. Those
Right.
guys aren't in that locker room anymore. You've got a bunch of young guys, out with the exception of Nikola Vucevic, who are finding their way and learning about themselves and each other as they go. And so someone's going to have to step up. You thought that was going to be Kobe White, Patrick Williams, but Patrick Williams is in his own head. It seems like, and Kobe
Right.
White can only do so much. Um, no one thought Modest Buzelis was going to be the lone bright spot in this season at this point, and so that's what's happening. And he can't be the sort of toughest mentally on the roster right now as the youngest player. I think he's 20 years old. Um, the Bulls just don't have that caliber of player on the roster right now, and they need to address that moving forward.
I'll get you because you mentioned Modest Buzelis. I'll get you out of here on this because I did want to ask you. You know, it is the sort of the one big bright spot of the season,
Mhm.
um, which has been even more so of a bright spot now that he's getting more minutes, and how he's progressed, shown up. Since the beginning of the year, we've seen a lot of improvement. Modest obviously fell to the Bulls at 11 when he was projected to go much higher. Plays with a ton of confidence, is aggressive. But to me, the most impressive thing is actually how mature he is. When you hear from him in the locker room, how self-aware he is, humble, always looking to get better. What do you think the potential is for Modest? And do the Bulls potentially have something here as far as him being a franchise cornerstone for the future?
That's a great question. I mean, about his potential. I've heard from the Bulls that they see him as a Franz Wagner type.
Mm,
That would be very intriguing, obviously, if I'm a Bulls fan. And Billy Donovan has talked about putting the ball in his hands more and allowing him to develop as a playmaker in pick and roll. And so he obviously needs to add that level and layer to his game if he's going to reach that level of potential. So, but I do love everything that I'm seeing so far with him, including what you're talking about in the locker room. He's talking about just taking one game at a time, and not in a cliche way. You kind of feel that he actually means what he's saying when he's
right.
talking about big games, big performances don't matter to him. It's all about going out the next game and replicating that. And so we're seeing him have some success that I don't think a lot of us expected to see. He's got some obvious areas of improvement, defensive coverages, being able to get stronger and maintain his position, in man-to-man defense, obviously. So those things will get better in time. But I think the Bulls have a really, really solid rookie who is eager to learn, eager to get better, and is probably going to do so because of his hunger.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Franz Wagner because the Bulls could have had Franz Wagner had they not traded away their pick for Nikola Vucevic back in 2021. Anyway, Darnell, as always, really appreciate you making the time. Keep up all the great work covering this team. We'll be following along, as well as all the great work on Money Talks. I love reading up the stuff. And best of luck for the rest of the season.
Appreciate you. Thank you.